Chapter 137 to 143. In the secret room, Orochimaru was sitting on a chair, holding an open scroll in his hand. Seeing Hyuga come in, he said in his trademark hoarse voice, "Kuroto, I have a question." Hyuga stood quietly at the door and asked, "What question?" Orochimaru didn't rush to speak, but rolled up the scroll in his hand little by little. Under the flickering candlelight, his face flickered between light and darkness. After rolling up the scroll, Orochimaru threw it to Hyuga. Catching the scroll, Hyuga opened it and found that it was full of information about himself. The most recent information even included the fight between Team 11 and the defected Uchiha Shinichi. Hyuga smiled and said, "It seems that you have been paying attention to me." Orochimaru stuck out his tongue like a snake and licked the corner of his mouth, saying gloomily, "Your excellence makes it impossible for me to ignore you." Hyuga said calmly, "Thank you for the compliment." Orochimaru narrowed his eyes. Hyuga's calmness made him feel a trace of fear. Compared to others, Orochimaru has a much deeper understanding of Hyuga. At least, Orochimaru knows that Hyuga currently has the Ryumyaku's Jinchuriki. After pondering for a while, Orochimaru said, "I heard that you fought with Uchiha Shinichi and defeated him." The corner of Kuroto's mouth rose as he smiled, "It's just a brief exchange, I can't deal with him." Orochimaru mentioning Uchiha Shinichi is completely within Hyuga's expectations. He even suspects that Orochimaru is already planning to seize Uchiha Shinichi's Manjikyu Sharingan. After all, in the original story, after Itachi joined the Akatsuki, Orochimaru couldn't wait to attack him. Sure enough, Orochimaru asked again, "What is the ability of his Manjikyu Sharingan?" Hyuga first shook his head, then deliberately exaggerated, "I don't know, I only know that he is very strong, no one in the village can stop him, even Danzo has to avoid him." "Humph." Orochimaru snorted coldly, his expression somewhat disdainful. It's just that Kuroto doesn't know whether this cold snort is disdain for Uchiha Shinichi or disdain for Danzo. Hyuga said, "Orochimaru-sama, if you want to deal with Uchiha Shinichi, I advise you to be more cautious." Hyuga still needs Orochimaru to inquire about Hiriko's information, or further, to obtain Hiriko's secret technique, so he doesn't want Orochimaru to leave the Akatsuki organization too early. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed, revealing a strange smile. "How do you know that I want to deal with him?" Hyuga shrugged, "Just like how I know that you want to deal with my opponent, it's actually very easy to guess." Orochimaru gently raised his hand, and countless snake shadows shot out from his sleeves towards Hyuga. Whoosh! Whoosh! Hyuga didn't dodge, instead, he pulled out the blade of grass from his waist. Then, he brandished his sword. Under the sharp sword light, all the poisonous snakes shot out from Orochimaru's sleeves were cut into several pieces and scattered on the ground, the pieces of meat twitching in a disorderly manner. Orochimaru said, "It seems that you have solved the caged bird." In Orochimaru's opinion, Hyuga, as the spy he left in the village, would never dare to have a showdown with him without solving the caged bird. After all, as long as he reveals Hyuga's identity as a spy, he doesn't even need to do anything. Hyuga will die in the hands of the Hyuga clan without solving the caged bird. Holding the blade of grass. Maru. Hyuga didn't comment on Orochimaru's words. Orochimaru once again stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. "You really fascinate me more and more, let me see how many secrets are hidden in your body." After saying that, Orochimaru quickly printed and shouted, "Secret technique, sealed 10,000 snakes formation." Bang! In an instant, the secret room was filled with poisonous smoke. At the same time, the hissing sound of the snake's tongue also came into Hyuga's ears from all directions. Hyuga put on the gas mask, and then quietly opened the Tenseigan under the cover of the mask. This gas mask was specially prepared by Hyuga before he set off. His methods of using poison were almost taught by Orochimaru. In the face of Orochimaru, he naturally will not guard against Orochimaru's poison. After activating the Tenseigan, the mere poisonous smoke also lost its effect of obscuring his vision. Everything in the secret room became clear at a glance in his Tenseigan. After a little look, he found the figure of Orochimaru, and then holding the blade of grass. Maru slowly walked over. Swish! 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 Almost every step he took, there would be more than a dozen poisonous snakes pouncing on Hyuga from different directions, and their results were without exception, all of them were broken into several pieces, and their heads were separated from their bodies. In the past, in the face of such a dense and strange attack, Hyuga, who was inexperienced, might choose to use revolving heaven to defend. But with one fierce battle after another, whether it was victory or defeat, Hyuga, who constantly summed up the experience and lessons, his mediocre combat awareness was also rapidly improving. Seeing Hyuga approaching himself step by step, Orochimaru sneered and opened his mouth, spitting out a blade of grass from his stomach. Sword. Accompanied by the gust of wind, a sword light slashed at Hyuga. Hyuga did not dare to be careless, and quickly used the blade of grass in his hand. Maru to meet it. Clang. A sharp and harsh sound of metal clashing rang out in the almost closed secret room. Orochimaru's eyes moved to the blade of grass in Hyuga's hand. Maru wondered, blade of grass. Sword. Hyuga also took advantage of this short interval to look at the blade of grass in Orochimaru's hand. Sword. He thought to himself, this blade should be the blade of grass that killed 3 generations of Naruto, right? Sword. Clang, clang, clang. The two did not communicate, nor did they retreat. They started a close combat in the closed secret room. For a moment, the sword light flashed in the secret chamber, and all the chairs and decorations were destroyed. Even the candlesticks were cut into pieces by the sword light. The candles that were as thick as a forearm were even cut into 2 halves from the wick. As the candlestick was cut out, the secret room fell into darkness, but in the darkness, the battle continued. Boom. After a while, the secret room finally could not withstand the 2 sharp blades of grass. The destruction of the sword collapsed in a roar. Accompanied by the smoke of the collapse of the secret room, 2 figures flashed out. Glancing at Orochimaru, Hyuga smiled and said, "You have been hit by my 15 swords." Orochimaru did not care and also smiled. "You are indeed a genius of the Hyuga family. Your physical skills are really commendable, but it's almost time." Hyuga asked, "What time?" Orochimaru held the sword in one hand and put the other hand on his waist. He smiled and said, "Do you think you can block my poisonous smoke by wearing a gas mask?" Although the natural energy contained in Ryomai chakra gives Hyuga a headache, it also brings him an unexpected self-healing ability, making him immune to many minor toxins. As long as he doesn't inhale a large amount of it through his respiratory tract, even the highly toxic concocted by Orochimaru can't do anything to him. Orochimaru's expression gradually became cold, and after a while, he frowned slightly. Hyuga saw this and said lightly, "Did you feel it? This is a paralytic toxin I synthesized. I hope I didn't embarrass you." Orochimaru said in a hoarse voice, "Hey, nice little thing." Orochimaru looked like he didn't care on the surface, but in fact, Hyuga's Sharingan didn't care at all. The paralytic toxin on the blade caused a lot of trouble to his body. Although it didn't achieve a complete paralysis effect, he can clearly feel that the part of his body that was hit by the sword was faintly numb. Just then, a twisted wooden stake rose from the ground and entangled Hyuga. Immediately afterward, Yamato jumped out of the shadow and jumped in front of Orochimaru, protecting Orochimaru behind him. "Orochimaru-sama, are you okay?" In Yamato's mind, Orochimaru should be able to deal with Hyuga easily. But he didn't expect that after a fierce battle, not only did Orochimaru fail to quickly take down Hyuga, but he also seemed to be injured and was faintly at a disadvantage. On the other hand, Hyuga didn't try to struggle, but carefully felt the binding effect of wood release. In terms of binding power alone, even a weakened version of wood release like Yamato is better than many elite Jonin's earth release ninjutsu, and Hyuga also felt that wood release is not only absorbing his chakra, but also has a weak suppression effect on Ryomai chakra. Is this wood escape? Yamato's would escape technique that had been weakened, who knew how many times, still had this type of effect. One could imagine just how powerful the exceptional talents at their peak would be if they used immortal techniques together with wood escape technique. It really was incomparably troublesome just thinking about it. After a little understanding of the effect of wood release, Hyuga poured the Tenseigan chakra into the grass in his hand. On the pill, the wrist holding the sword shook lightly, and the wooden stakes that bound him were all cut off. Yamato was stunned. "This." Hyuga curled his lips. "Your wood escape is far inferior to first generations. Leave. There's nothing for you to do here." Yamato's body contained great research value. Hyuga also valued it very much, so he didn't want to accidentally kill Yamato. Yamato wanted to cast wood release again, but at this time, Orochimaru pressed his shoulder from behind. Yamato turned his head and looked at Orochimaru in confusion. "Orochimaru-sama." Orochimaru looked at Hyuga and smiled evilly. Then, without saying a word, he dragged Yamato and disappeared into the dark tunnel. Almost at the same time, more than 20 ninjas who had been hiding in various parts of the tunnel made their move. Fire release, Earth Fire Dragon Bullet. Earth release, Earth Spear Thrust. Hyuga's eyes turned cold as he dodged the earth spears that were aimed at him. At the same time, from the corner of his eyes, he also noticed the raging flames that were coming at him. He used his Tenseigan to look around and found a flaw in the structure of the tunnel's rock wall. So, while he was flipping, he threw out the grass pellet. The pill accurately hit that flaw. Bang! In an instant, with a roar, the entire rock wall collapsed, just in time to block the surging fire release ninjutsu for Hyuga. As soon as the tumbling Hyuga landed on the ground, two black shadows pounced on him, accompanied by a cold light. Hyuga's camera moved to the side, avoiding the long sword in the hands of the two shadows, and his soft fists hit the two shadows like punching sandbags, sending the two shadows flying. After that, Hyuga gently dusted off the dust on his body and looked at the grass that had fallen on the ground in the distance. He gripped the pill lightly, and in a split second, the grass. As if it had a mind of its own, the pill soared into the air and landed in his hand. Rustle. With a wave of his hand, Hyuga broke through the rock wall and stepped into another underground passage. In this passage, there were two black-clothed ninjas staring at Hyuga. Their eyes were cold, and there was not a trace of fear in their expressions. Walala. At this time, a ninja in black took out a string of chains, and the sound of the chains hitting each other echoed in the quiet passage. Hyuga didn't say anything. He just waved at the ninja in black. The ninja in black holding the chain whispered, "Do it." With his order, the other three ninjas in black also launched an attack together. They were either holding a sword or a kunai, and it seemed that they were ninjas with taijutsu. Hyuga wasn't interested in entangling with them. Seeing them rushing over, he immediately used Revolving Heaven Blade. Unlike the first time he used Revolving Heaven Blade, the Revolving Heaven Blade he used this time was not only more stable, but the consumption was also far less than the first time he used Revolving Heaven Blade. The four ninjas in black were like 4 carrots thrown into a blender. In an instant, they were slashed by the blade more than a dozen times and flew out, and the weapons in their hands were not spared. They were injected with the grass of the Tenseigan chakra. Pill was cut into pieces. On the ground outside the underground base, Orochimaru crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at the underground base with interest. Not long after, accompanied by a loud noise, the stone door at the entrance of the underground base was broken into several pieces. The rubble scattered on the ground, and a figure slowly walked out of it. Staring at Hyuga slowly walking out of the underground base, Orochimaru smiled and said, "It seems that those wastes didn't cause much trouble for you." Hyuga said calmly, "Orochimaru, continuing to cooperate is good for both of us." Orochimaru grinned and said, "Then I have to confirm whether you are qualified to cooperate with me first." Hyuga glanced at the half-destroyed underground base and said, "Isn't this enough? The previous one was just an appetizer." With a smile, Orochimaru slowly bit his finger, then quickly made a seal and shouted, "Psychic art." Bang! As a huge white smoke surged, Hyuga felt the ground tremble slightly. At this time, a low voice came from the white smoke, "Hey, Orochimaru, remember I told you, don't casually summon me." Orochimaru's hoarse voice also came from the smoke at the right time. "This time is different. Don't worry, the sacrifice will be offered later." The smoke gradually dissipated, and a giant purple snake like a mountain appeared in front of Hyuga. Thousand Snake. Looking at the mountain-like myriad snakes, Hyuga raised the grass in his hand. Wand slowly returned to the scabbard at his waist. Against a giant summon beast, be it a sword, a kunai, or a senboni, their effects were very limited. Therefore, Hyuga had to change his tactics. Standing on top of Viper's head, Orochimaru still had his arms crossed in front of his chest and said with a sinister smile, "Kuroto, let me see your artificial-tailed beast." Hyuga ignored Orochimaru. Instead, he assumed a soft fist stance, and his palms were filled with blue chakra. The snake dowager looked down at Hyuga and asked Orochimaru with some displeasure, "Hey, Orochimaru, is this the brat you want to deal with?" Orochimaru said, "Don't underestimate this kid. There's a monster hidden in his body." "Monster?" The snake dowager snorted haughtily. Then, she twisted her body and pounced towards Hyuga like a cannonball. Boom boom boom. A series of deafening explosions reverberated through the dense forest. There were flying gravel, broken trees, and dust that blotted out the sky. Every time 10,000 snakes flashed, it was no less than an A-grade Earth release ninjutsu. The earth seemed to be dancing with it, shaking ceaselessly, while the forest was ravaged by it. Rumbling noises could be heard one after another, as if the forest was howling in pain. After wreaking havoc for a while, the snake dowager finally stopped and snorted, "Orochimaru, where's the monster you were talking about?" Orochimaru's eyes scanned the messy forest, trying to find Hyuga's location. However, the smoke and dust around him interfered with his vision. His solemn expression revealed Orochimaru's current state of mind. Without a doubt, he had some doubts in his heart. He didn't know why Hyuga wanted to use soft fists to fight against Snake Dowager. This was undoubtedly very stupid. Everyone knew that the most effective way to deal with a large-scale spiritual beast was to summon a large-scale spiritual beast as well. Next would be large-scale ninjutsu. As for regular taijutsu, it was practically useless against large-scale spiritual beasts, unless the opponent's target wasn't Snake Dowager. Just then, a figure leaped out from the abdomen of the Snake Dowager and pounced straight at Orochimaru. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed into slits as he muttered, "Sure enough, they're coming for me." Hyuga, who was galloping, quickly formed hand seals and shouted, "8 trigram palm secret art, vacuum palm." Orochimaru was slightly stunned. He had heard of most of the soft fists of the Hyuga family. However, this was the first time he had heard of the vacuum palm that Hyuga mentioned. Hyuga, who was almost in front of him, stretched out both his hands towards Orochimaru. Ah! In an instant, Orochimaru felt an irresistible suction force pulling him towards Hyuga. The distance between the two wasn't far to begin with. In less than a breath's time, the two of them collided. Hyuga, who was already prepared, slammed his palm onto Orochimaru's chest and shouted, "Contract seal, repel." Orochimaru lowered his head in shock and saw a series of sealing techniques spreading out from Hyuga's palm. Like a spider web, it covered his chest. Bang! Before Orochimaru could react, the contract between him and Snake Dowager was cut off by the contract seal cast by Hyuga. Following that, the huge Snake Dowager turned into white smoke with a dull thud and returned to the Ryuchi Grotto. Without Snake Dowager, the two who were standing on top of the Snake Dowager fell from the sky and stood firmly on the ground. Orochimaru, who had recovered from his shock, glanced at the contract seal on his chest indifferently and said coldly, "Contract seal, huh? It seems that you have a lot of tricks up your sleeves." For Orochimaru, it wasn't difficult to remove the contract seal. However, if he wanted to communicate with Snake Dowager again, he would have to make a trip to the Ryuchi Grotto. However, this wasn't what he was concerned about. What he really cared about was the inexplicable suction force. This feeling was exactly the same as when he encountered Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki. Hyuga was panting lightly. In order to avoid Snake Dowager's attack, he suffered a lot. If it wasn't for rain pull, he would have been crushed into a pile of meat by Snake Dowager. As for the Bagwazang secret technique, vacuum palm, he naturally made it up. His goal was to conceal rotation's manipulation. For this reason, he purposely assumed a soft fist stance. Before he used it, he even made a few hand seals. The reason why Hyuga did this was mainly because Orochimaru had an inexplicable desire to possess the pupil Kekii, so he couldn't reveal the Tenseigan in front of Orochimaru. Otherwise, Orochimaru would have his eyes on him. At that time, not to mention continuing to cooperate, Orochimaru might even use the Akatsuki to deal with him. Orochimaru asked, "Is that a secret technique of your Hyuga family?" Hyuga nodded, "Yes. I don't know why, but that technique reminded me of a person." After a pause, Orochimaru continued, "A person with Rinnegan." Hyuga deliberately said, "Rinnegan? The eyes of Sage of Six Paths. Didn't you attack him? That kind of treasure should be what you yearn for even in your dreams." Orochimaru's face sank, but he didn't say anything. Kuroto smiled and said, "Let's stop here. If you continue, I won't be able to handle it." Orochimaru said coldly, "I'm not willing to give up until I see your artificial tailed beast." After that, Orochimaru said while making hand seals, "Speaking of which, after learning this technique, I haven't used it many times. This time, I will try it on you." On a big tree far away from the battlefield, Yamato was squatting on a branch with a solemn face. Next to him stood several thin figures. These children were the orange-haired Yugo, the white-haired Kimimaro, and the weak-looking Haku. Looking at the distance, Kimimaro said, "We should go help Orochimaru-sama." Yamato shook his head. Orochimaru-sama said that we are not allowed to intervene. Yugo sighed. The opponent is so strong that he can fight with Orochimaru-sama to this degree, it's really incredible. Haku nodded with lingering fear. Just now, if Yamato didn't use wood release to protect them, they would have been smashed into meat paste by the snake. Kimimaro asked, why did Orochimaru-sama's beast suddenly disappear? It was obvious that no one present could answer his question. At this time, Yamato pointed at the distant battlefield. Look. Such an incomparably huge monster had far exceeded the limits of the few imps' imagination. While they were shocked, their bodies instinctively trembled. Haku asked in a trembling voice, what is that? Even Yamato, the oldest among them, couldn't answer Haku's question. This question confused him and made him feel at a loss. Yugo stared at the eight-headed snake in the distance and said with uncertainty, I can feel the presence of Orochimaru-sama from that monster. What? Everyone exclaimed in surprise when they heard this. Yugo carefully sensed and confirmed, there is indeed a bit of Orochimaru-sama's presence. Yugo's perception wasn't the perception ninjutsu of perception-type ninjas. It was a more primitive perception that was closer to nature. Therefore, his perception wasn't based on chakra's attribute, but on the presence of nature. Kimimaro couldn't believe it and said, is that Orochimaru-sama? Yamato stood up and said, whether that is Orochimaru-sama or not, I believe that Orochimaru-sama won't be defeated. However, we should retreat further. On the battlefield. Hyuga raised his head and looked at the enormous eight-headed snake. His face darkened. Obviously, this was one of Orochimaru's strongest forbidden techniques, the Yamata no Jutsu. It was a forbidden technique that could rival the tailed beast. In the original world, Orochimaru had used this technique against Itachi, but it was easily defeated by Itachi's jutsu. His whole body was even sucked into the sealed world of the jutsu. However, this didn't mean that the Yamata no Jutsu was weak. After all, Nagato, who was almost at his peak strength in the Edo Tensei state, could easily crush Naruto and Chirabai, who were both perfect Jinchuriki. However, he still couldn't resist the seal of the jutsu. Hugh. After letting out a light breath, Hyuga slowly raised his hand and began to form a seal. Since he can't use the Tenseigan chakra mode to deal with Orochimaru, then he can only use the power of the dragon vein. Therefore, he converged all divergent thoughts and abandoned all thoughts that had nothing to do with fighting. As the seals were completed, he shouted in a low voice, Dragon Vein Seal, release. In a split second, the dragon vein chakra gushed out of his body. The thick chakra transformed into a purplish-green dragon that hovered above his head. One of the eight-headed serpent's head opened its mouth, revealing half of Orochimaru's body. At this time, Orochimaru looked wet, and his body was wrapped in sticky mucus, like a newborn baby. He looked at Hyuga, who had opened the seal of the dragon vein, licked his lips with his slender tongue, and said in a playful tone, TSK, is this the dragon vein chakra? It's really fascinating. Hyuga's expression gradually calmed down. He watched Orochimaru vigilantly while monitoring the dragon vein in his body. The biggest flaw of the artificial tailed beast was its instability. Even the second-generation leader Naruto couldn't solve this problem, so the village sealed the artificial tailed beast plan. Therefore, after Hyuga became the dragon vein's Jinchuriki, he has been using the dragon vein in his body as a battery, and has never directly driven the dragon vein to fight. First, it was to cover up the dragon vein. Second, it was to prevent the dragon vein from going berserk. At this point, if Hyuga didn't use the power of the dragon vein, Orochimaru would be even more suspicious. As more and more dragon vein chakra gushed out of Hyuga's body, the purple dragon above Hyuga's head quickly expanded. Gradually, the size of the purple dragon was comparable to the size of Orochi. Under the wrapping of the dragon vein chakra, Hyuga's body slowly floated in the air. Driving the dragon vein is similar to driving the tailed beast to fight. Hyuga doesn't need to absorb the dragon vein chakra into his body to use ninjutsu, he only needs to order the dragon vein to fight on its own. So no matter how many dragon vein chakra erupts, he doesn't have to worry about his body being attacked by the natural energy. The only thing he needs to pay attention to is to make sure that the dragon vein doesn't go berserk. So, the two behemoths confronted each other from afar. Every time the purple dragon grew bigger, Orochimaru's expression became more serious. When the purple dragon was about the same size as Orochimaru's face was no longer playful. Instead, it was replaced by a look of fear. Orochimaru said coldly, Kuroto, let me have a taste of your artificial tailed beast. After saying that, the 8 snakeheads of Orochi rushed towards Hyuga's purple dragon like a heavy hammer. Whoosh! The 8 snakeheads, which were the size of a hill, attacked quickly and violently. Just the wind alone was comparable to several grade A wind release ninjutsu. So, accompanied by the attack of Orochi, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the forest. The wind was so strong that it uprooted a large number of trees. While floating in the air with the help of the Ryumyaku chakra, Tsuejin's pupils shrank slightly, and his face sank as he channeled the Ryumyaku chakra to meet Yamada no Orochi head-on. In an instant, the white body of Yamada no Orochi and the cyan-purple chakra dragon were entangled together. This was a real battle between the two monsters. The momentum was far greater than the previous raging of the 1,000 snakes in the forest. With just a few rolls, a large area of the forest was razed to the ground. Orochi entangled the purple dragon like an octopus. The 8 snakeheads bit the body of the purple dragon, and the purple dragon tore off one of the snakeheads. Puff! The snakehead immediately spat out a huge amount of blood, like blood rain, splashing into the forest. However, after a while, the snakehead that was torn off by the purple dragon grew again. At first glance, it was almost no different from before. If it wasn't for the strong smell of blood in the air, the scene of the severed head just now would have seemed like an illusion. Orochimaru smiled and said, "Kuroto, why don't you use the real body? You should have created the body of the artificial tailed beast." Hyuga did not answer and urged the dragon vein with a sullen face. At the beginning of the design, Hyuga did not expect to use the dragon vein in battle. So, when it was shaped, the appearance of the dragon vein was slightly funny. This was also one of the reasons why he was reluctant to use the real body of the dragon vein in battle. However, the more important reason was that he did not want to damage the purple clay body of the dragon vein in battle, causing the dragon vein to go berserk. One purple and one white, the two monsters chased and fought in the forest. Everywhere they went, they would set off endless smoke and stirred up the forest. Swish swish swish. The blue-purple dragon swept its tail, rolled up more than a dozen trees and threw them at Orochi no Orochi. The 7 heads of Orochi no Orochi opened their bloody mouths and chewed all the trees flying towards them into pieces, and the snake head with half of Orochimaru's body in its mouth stood far away. Orochimaru, who was hiding in the mouth of the snake, had regained his playful expression at this time, as if he was going to eat Hyuga. Hyuga immediately urged the dragon vein to rush over. It was just a crisscross, and in the smoke and dust, half of the snake head flew out with blood splashing in the sky. At the moment of the crisscross just now, the blue-purple dragon tore off a snake head, and the remaining snake head tore off a lot of chakra from the blue-purple dragon. While flying, Hyuga slightly curled his lips. Being accustomed to the free flight of the Tenseigan chakra mode, now the flight wrapped in the Ryumyaku chakra is as awkward as it can be. Not only is it awkward, but in terms of speed, it is far less than the flight of the Tenseigan chakra mode, so it is more accurate to use the word flying. TSK, he entered the field he is best at. After a light sigh, Hyuga once again urged the dragon vein to fight with Orochi no Orochi. Orochimaru is best at this kind of stalemate, because of the terrifying regenerative ability of Orochi no Jutsu. It is not inferior to the tailed beast in hand-to-hand combat. Therefore, if there is a lack of a finishing move, no matter who it is, facing Orochimaru's Orochi no Jutsu will be a headache. The fight continued, and the entire forest was almost destroyed by the two monsters in a short period of time. As they fought, neither of them dared to be distracted. Only when he heard a weak cry for help did Hyuga notice a small figure hanging on a tree branch not far away. He looked out of the corner of his eye and saw that the small figure was a 4 or 5-year-old child with a delicate face and a thin body. Below them, Yamato used his wood release to create a shield to protect the other 2 children. Hyuga's figure flashed, and he flew to the tree branch, picked up the child hanging on it, and then landed in front of Yamato and the others. Yamato hurriedly stood up and shouted, "You! What do you want to do?" Now he knew that the boy in front of him, who was only a few years older than him, was a powerful ninja comparable to Orochimaru. Kimimaro and Yugo, who were protected by Yamato, rushed out and shouted, "Put Haku down." "Bye." Slightly startled, Hyuga threw the child in his hand to Yamato and said, "Why don't you guys hide further away?" Yamato felt helpless when he heard that. They had tried their best to avoid the two monsters, but the movement speed of the two monsters and the range of the battle were far beyond their imagination. So even though they wanted to escape long ago, they were still affected by the battle. At this time, Yamada no Orochi rushed over, and Orochimaru, who was hiding in the mouth of the snake, also noticed Yamato and the others. Hyuga said lightly, Orochimaru, you can't do anything to me, and I can't do anything to you. Is there any need to continue such a boring battle? Orochimaru glanced at Yamato and the others who were close to Hyuga and thought for a moment, then immediately smiled and said, Kuroto, your artificial-tailed beast really opened my eyes. Hyuga said calmly, Orochimaru, not only did you save my life, but you also taught me. I will never forget this, so we shouldn't be enemies. Orochimaru licked his lips and said, it seems that I'm not much worse than Jiraiya with a student like you. After saying that, Orochimaru released the Yamata no Jutsu. This time, Orochimaru felt that he had figured out the details of Hyuga. In his opinion, Hyuga indeed had the strength to cooperate with him on an equal footing, but not to the point where he could threaten him. In short, he felt that he could still control Hyuga. Seeing that Orochimaru released the Yamata no Jutsu, Hyuga quickly resealed the dragon vein into his body. In the fierce battle just now, the dragon vein was on the verge of going berserk several times. This is not to say that the dragon vein's origin is rejecting Hyuga, but because the dragon vein's chakra's amount is too large, so once the dragon vein is used without restrictions, the dragon vein will always be on the verge of going berserk. So on the surface, Hyuga looks like a real Jinchuriki, and it seems that he didn't consume much energy during the fierce battle. But in fact, he used the Tenseigan chakra in his body several times to suppress the dragon vein that was on the verge of going berserk. If the battle continues, he will definitely be the first to collapse. Looking at the messy and devastated forest, and glancing at the calm Orochimaru, Hyuga couldn't help but think, to deal with Orochimaru, I really need to use Genjutsu. The facts in front of him once again prove that to deal with Orochimaru, Genjutsu are time-consuming and laborious choices, only Genjutsu is the most effective. This also reminded Hyuga of Itachi. The biggest difference between Itachi and other Uchiha is that he will never underestimate his opponent, and he will never fight unprepared. In this regard, even Jishue is slightly inferior, because Jishue once lost one of his eyes to Danzo because of carelessness. Orochimaru walked out of the forest at this time, and as he walked, he asked casually, you came to see me this time, there must be something important, right? Hyuga chuckled and followed him, there are some experimental things that I really need your help with. Looking at the two people who were fighting to death just now, and in the blink of an eye, they were talking and laughing side by side, Yamato and the other children were all stunned. Haku said with lingering fear, I thought I was going to die just now. Yugo asked curiously, who is he? Yamato introduced, his name is Hyuga, he is a my ninja, and it seems that he is also a student of Orochimaru-sama. So he is a student of Orochimaru-sama. Kimimara's eyes stared at Hyuga as he secretly swore in his heart, Hyuga, one day I will definitely surpass you, Orochimaru-sama's eyes belong to me. After regaining his senses, Yamato looked at everyone and asked, none of you are injured, right? On Hyuga's side, after a few words, he asked, you should have seen Hirako recently, right? Orochimaru immediately stopped and stared at Suijin with a piercing gaze, how did you know? Orochimaru carefully looked at Hyuga for a while, seemingly judging something, and finally turned his head and said, not long ago, Hirako also joined my organization. Hyuga pretended to be casual, I didn't expect him to join as well. Orochimaru snorted lightly, he doesn't have the right to choose, and it's not a bad thing for him. After thinking for a while, Hyuga tentatively asked, Orochimaru-sama, I heard that Hirako has mastered a very practical taboo jutsu, is this rumor true? Glancing at Hyuga, Orochimaru said with great interest, so, this is what you're interested in. Ha, I really can't hide anything from you. Since Orochimaru has seen through him, Hyuga no longer concealed it, and said bluntly, yes, I'm very interested in his taboo jutsu. Orochimaru stopped and looked into the distance, as if he was recalling something. After a while, he slowly said, Hirako is my peer, I'm sure you already know this. His aptitude is the most mediocre among his peers, so the taboo jutsu he developed is a kind of taboo jutsu that can plunder other people's Kekkai Genkai. That kind of thing shouldn't be attractive to geniuses like you. To some extent, Orochimaru and Hirako are the same kind of people. But compared to Hirako, who is mediocre and often ignored, Orochimaru has a very high talent in ninjutsu. Later, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru were selected by the Three Generations Naruto and became the direct disciples of the Three Generations Naruto. And Hirako, who was a close friend of Orochimaru during their school days, eventually drifted away from them. But even the extremely talented Orochimaru, after reaching his current realm, is aware of the insurmountable gap between a ninja without Kekkai Genkai and a ninja with Kekkai Genkai. That was why Orochimaru was so obsessed with the forbidden technique that he single-handedly developed the undead reincarnation that allowed him to plunder other people's bodies and Kekkai Genkai. At the same time, he also began to understand Hiruko's ambition and struggle hidden beneath his humble and lowly heart. Every time he was praised as a genius by true geniuses, Hyuga would feel a little uncomfortable. He smiled and said, "I feel that his forbidden art has great potential." Orochimaru collected his thoughts and asked, "You want the technique of Onigiri?" Hyuga nodded lightly. Although he had a casual smile on his face, his eyes were abnormally firm. He needed the Guei-Yero technique. This was his opportunity to become a god. That spell is only half finished. No one's body can withstand that kind of burden. After a pause, Orochimaru chuckled and said, "If anyone's body can withstand that kind of burden, then he wouldn't need this kind of nondescript technique." Regarding Orochimaru's evaluation, Hyuga agreed with half of it, while the other half didn't agree. With Hiruko's crude method, it is true that no one's body can withstand the burden of fusion. Even if Hiruko transformed his body, he still ended up looking like neither a human nor a ghost. Therefore, on this point, Orochimaru's evaluation is pertinent. But Orochimaru obviously underestimated Hiruko's talent. Hiruko may not have the talent to become a ninja, but he is definitely not inferior to Orochimaru in terms of scientific research. In Kuroto's memory, Hiruko had successfully absorbed 4 types of Kekkai using the Chimara technique. Although he had failed at the last step and failed to absorb Kakashi, but with 4 types of Kekkai, his combat power was already above ordinary Kage ranks. The elites of the Umbu couldn't even resist a single move from him, and an elite Jonin like Kakashi, who can become a candidate for Naruto, can't do anything to him. Thinking of this, Hyuga asked, "What if he solved the problem of the burden on his body?" Orochimaru replied in an unusually positive tone, "All forbidden arts have their limits, he won't be able to complete the last step." Hyuga thought to himself, yes, but who would have thought that he would use the power of celestial phenomenon to complete the last step with the help of the Golden Ring's solar eclipse? Hyuga has already felt that Orochimaru doesn't care much about the technique of Onigiri. Of course, there are some flaws in the technique of Onigiri, but more than that, it may be because of Orochimaru's arrogance. Perhaps in Orochimaru's mind, Hiruko will always be a head lower than him, a nobody that he has left far behind. But Hyuga knows that Hiruko is a scientific research genius that is not inferior to Orochimaru. Just like Orochimaru, what he lacks is broadening his horizons. Taking the Onigiri technique as an example, the brutal fusion can indeed achieve the goal of plundering the opponent's bloodline to a certain extent, but it is only a fusion of quantity. Even if you pay the price of transforming your body into a monster, it only accumulates quantity, but there is no qualitative improvement. This is also the reason why Hiruko, who has fused 4 types of Kekkai Genkai, lost to Naruto. His Hell release is effective against ordinary ninjas, but once he encounters a powerful ninjutsu like the Helix Shuriken, it immediately shows its weakness. And in the shinobi world, there are many techniques that are more powerful than the Helix Shuriken. Without a qualitative improvement, once you encounter an extraordinarily powerful enemy, not to mention 4 types of Kekkai Genkai, even 4 types of Kekkai Genkai would be useless. But it is undeniable that Hiruko's original intention of creating the Onigiri technique was a genius idea. From this idea, Hyuga got an inspiration. The most magical thing about the Onigiri technique is that it can be fused with Kekkai Genkai, in other words, it can be fused with the chakra attribute, but its weakness is that the fusion is too rough and too brutal. For any living creature, the fusion between the body and the soul is of utmost importance. Just like the Edo Tensei, with different sacrifices, the strength of the ninja after the Edo Tensei is completely different. This is also the reason why during the 4th Shinobi World War, the 4 Naruto shinobi, who used the White Zetsu's clone as a sacrifice, were able to display close to their peak strength. But the Onigiri technique not only destroys the fusion between the body and the soul, but also destroys the balance of the body itself, which is why even if Hiruko fused 4 types of Kekkai Genkai, he still couldn't obtain a qualitative improvement. Hyuga, on the other hand, thought of a way to circumvent this weakness of the Onigiri technique. Since the fusion method of the Guei-Yero technique was too crude, then he would use cloning technology to clone a clone that was completely compatible with him. Then, he would use the Guei-Yero technique to fuse these clones that originally belonged to him. This way, he could avoid the flaw of the Guei-Yero technique. Therefore, Hyuga had to build a huge laboratory for this purpose. He needed to create a water escape clone, a fire escape clone, an earth escape clone, a wind escape clone, a lightning escape clone, and a yang escape clone that represented a celestial body. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.